are broadcasting live.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. This is the council meeting for the town of Mono on September 28th, 2021. This meeting is being conducted by means of electronic participation as permitted by Section 238, subsection 3.1 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, and the Town of Mono Procedural Bylaw 2020-42. Council chambers are not yet open to the public. This meeting may be viewed live and otherwise on our website. Residents can join the council meeting using information that has been previously circulated. I see that we have a quorum. And again, we are notifying everyone participating that these proceedings are being recorded by way of video and broadcast. At this point or at any point in the course of the meeting, members are free to disclose pecuniary interest following up in writing with the clerk. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Mono resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Teotante, Adawadaron, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. We also acknowledge that the town of Mono resides within the treaty lands named under Treaty 18 of the log purchase of 1818. These traditional territories upon which we live and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past, the present, and connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. The first item is approval of the agenda, and as part of this, I'm wondering if members of council can indicate any topics under Schedule A that they would like to bring forward for discussion under new business. Are there any items that we wish to address under news from Schedule A? Yes, Rob.
I'd just like to refer to item 6.
Okay. Any other topics that we'd be bringing forward from Schedule A on a consent basis? Thank you. I have a motion then that council approves the agenda session 2021 is circulated. Do I have a mover for that? Fred Nix. And seconder? Ralph Mangtalo. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Proclamations. I take it that we don't have any proclamations today, Fred?
No, we don't have any proclamations, but I do believe there are the minutes of the previous meeting that could be approved, Your Worship.
Yes, thank you. I jumped the gun there. I have a motion that council approve the minutes of session 19-2021 as circulated. Do I have a mover for that? Moved by Sharon Martin, seconded by Fred Nix. Any discussion of the minutes as circulated? Seeing none, any opposed? That motion is carried. Proclamations, none today. Public question period. Do we have any submitted questions?
No, we didn't receive any questions submitted online in the advance of this meeting.
Thank you. Are there any individuals online who would like to ask council a question? Seeing none. Delegations, we have the Mayor Shelburne, Wade Mills, as well as the CAO of the town of Shelburne, Denise Morrissey, with us today to make a presentation with regard to service delivery review. Wade, would you like to commence?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Deputy Mayor, members of council. As you mentioned, I'm joined by Denise Morrissey, our CAO, as well as Councillor Shane Hall. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to drop by and share some thoughts and hopefully have a productive conversation and gather some feedback from you folks as well. We've met with the rest of our municipal partners in the indoor rec and fire spheres. And Mono is the last stop on this, at least for these introductory meetings. So again, thank you for your time. What I would suggest, Your Worship, if it's okay with you, we're really here to talk about two separate issues: indoor recreation and fire services. And I would propose that we sort of separate those into two different buckets. And I'll start off with indoor rec, if that's okay, and then we can sort of flush out that discussion before we move on to fire. So in terms of what led us to this point, there were really a couple of factors. This council, shortly after taking office in 2018, early 2019, engaged in a rather comprehensive strategic planning process. And as part of that, a couple of things were highlighted. One was our desire to sort of perform our own service delivery review. And through those discussions, we highlighted external board governance as being an issue that we wanted to look at. And then fast forwarding a little bit, the county took the lead rather on the service delivery review and conducted their full-blown service delivery review that a few of us were involved in around this table. And coming out of that final report, the consultants that the county had engaged did identify both indoor recreation and fire services as areas that were worthy of further examination. And part of their recommendations were that, that there were perhaps some possibilities to look at, reconfiguring the governance structures that are currently in place. So that sort of led to where we are. So with that in mind, leading off with the indoor rec topic, there's a few factors that are going on within the town of Shelburne that kind of lead us to question whether or not the existing model is still the most appropriate model going forward. It's certainly no secret to anybody, in this virtual room that the town of Shelburne is experiencing tremendous growth. And with that growth, there certainly has been a heightened sense of expectation amongst our residents as to the sorts of services, amenities, programming that we have to offer. So in kind of looking at that big picture, I think our council is very interested in embarking upon kind of a larger Parks and Rec vision that likely will incorporate some arts and culture components as well. And what makes it difficult when we start to look at the landscape is our largest Parks and Recreation asset, at least when it comes to indoor assets, is the CDRC facility. And what's kind of unusual about our relationship vis-a-vis that building is that the town of Shelburne owns it, but we really don't have any managerial control over it. So as some of you may or may not know, that facility is managed and operated by a board of management, that consists of representatives from a number of different municipalities. The town of Shelburne has a plurality of votes on that board. We do not have a veto, and I think that's probably for good reason. But again, it makes it difficult when we're looking to advance our Parks and Recreation agenda when we don't have managerial control over our single largest indoor recreational asset. So what we're looking at doing, as I mentioned, is developing a larger, broader-based vision when it comes to Parks and Rec within the town of Shelburne. And I want to make one thing perfectly clear is that this vision is not to the exclusion of our surrounding neighbors. So just in the way now that folks from Mono, Mulmer, Melanchthon, and Amaranth come to Shelburne and sort of treat that as the regional hub for a number of things, but including indoor recreation. We certainly don't see that changing going forward. What we would like to be able to do, though, is enhance what's being offered at that facility, both perhaps in terms of physical amenities, but also in terms of programming and use. Anybody who's familiar with the CDRC, I think would acknowledge that it currently has a fairly narrow, singular focus. It basically is focused around ice hockey in the winter, and there's an outdoor pool that's getting a lot of use in the summer, and a few parks program or camp programs rather, and the odd time the floor gets used for ball hockey or lacrosse. But beyond that, there really hasn't been any move to look at a broader use of this facility in terms of a community hub, integrating other sorts of aspects, whether it's parks and trails, other kinds of programming, as I mentioned, arts and culture aspects. So we just see a huge opportunity for that building, but it becomes difficult again from our perspective to make any sort of significant investment when we don't really have that managerial control over the building. And I sort of liken it to the hesitance that one might have to spend a lot of money on renovations to a house that they're renting. Sure, there are things you want to do, but you're perhaps only willing to go so far when you don't actually have control over the asset that you're putting money into. So that's sort of where we're coming from. Now, the other thing that I think I should point out is, what we're not looking to do is completely disrupt or diminish the partnerships that have been built over the years, because I think a lot of value is certainly added through those partnerships. What we're looking at, conversely, is just, is there a better way to manage this asset going forward that still respects the contributions of our neighbors, still ultimately creates that open door atmosphere for our neighbors, but also allows us to sort of move this facility forward, in sort of an exciting and bold way. So with that, part of what we're looking for here is some feedback from our partners to kind of help formulate our path forward. As I've said to the other municipalities that we've visited, I envision this round of meetings to sort of be the first of potentially a few. So I think Shane and Denise and I are quite interested to hear thoughts around this table. We can then take those back to our folks and factor those into our discussions moving forward, and then likely come back at a later date.
Thank you. Do any members of council have any questions for Wade? Yes, Fred?
Yeah, I don't have a question so much, but I am struck by a bit of irony here. Wade, I'm a bit indifferent on indoor recreation because it's not my area of expertise. So I'm sort of indifferent to your request, like I'm neither for or against it. But I am struck a bit by the irony, as Kim Heaton will remember, during the last council that existed in Orangeville, we were invited to a very nice meeting, nice sandwiches by a councillor in Orangeville and staff. And they own their own indoor recreation facilities. And they got Amaranth and Mono and East Gary around the table. And guess what they wanted? They wanted their neighbors to help pay for the capital cost of the Tony Rose and other facilities. So I just passed that on as an odd sort of comment. I hope it doesn't happen to you, but it did happen to us. I didn't attend the second meeting because I sort of gave up after the first one. I think Kim went to the second meeting. Anyway, just a comment, Your Worship.
Thank you.
No,
Ralph?
I appreciate that.
Oh, sorry. Wade? Go ahead, Wade.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Ralph and then Sharon.
Thanks for coming, Wade. I appreciate the the opportunity for us to have a good discussion about this. As you know, I sat on the board a few years back when Mayor Ryan was otherwise involved, but I haven't been on very close to it for the last 2 years. You mentioned an interest in the town in expanding their areas of what they are offering, and by having better managerial control, that would allow you to do that or help facilitate it. My question is, have you had in the last few years tried to expand your programs or to advance into areas of other recreation or cultural activities and had a problem because of the present board construction?
Yeah, yes and no, to be direct, Ralph. You know, as I've mentioned, I mean, I was on the board for a number of years last term, and you know, as I said, there is basically a singular focus when it comes to the current operation of that facility. And one of the things that I always found, you know, as being a member of that board was that it was kind of difficult to break through, you know, that barrier. We've always done it a certain way, and you know, that's what we know, and that's what we're comfortable with, and therefore that's the way we'll continue to do things. You know, to be perfectly frank, though, we haven't pushed awfully hard at the board level. But again, it comes down to that question about, you know, how much time, energy, money do we want to, you know, pour into the facility when, as I mentioned at the outset, we don't have a majority of votes at that table, so any decision could be, you know, essentially overturned without our input at any time. So there's a certain amount of certainty that I think we're looking for going forward before we're willing to make, you know, significant commitments in the vein that we're thinking.
Thank you. Shane, my apologies for overlooking you in the introductions. You or Denise have anything to say on the rec center?
I don't. I think Wade's basically covered it, the most of it. As mentioned, the real focus is looking at, you know, a full parks and rec type activity, which needs to include the indoors as well as the outdoors. And as Wade says, this is that only true indoor asset that really is there. So, you know, trying to bring all that together is really what the main focus is.
Thank you. Denise?
Thank you, Mayor Crewman. So we have as well, just to build on what the Mayor and the Councillor Call has said, we've invested through Council significant money through a special levy in enhancing parks and recreation as per their Council strategic directions. I think we've all realized through COVID-19 that there's never been more of an importance for outdoor recreation and programming. And we've realized too that integration is critical for our strategies going forward. In addition, as the Mayor mentioned, we have culture. We're currently doing a feasibility study for Grace Tippling Hall and how best to integrate all of those areas of activity, programming, as well as I know we gave you, and I'm sorry, Fred, I think it was 176 pages of attachments, but within the recommendations that came from our anti-racism task force was also some very prescriptive recommendations with respect to evolving programming, safe place spaces, and we recognize, at least administratively from the directions of Council, that the investment in the subsidy in recreation in particular is probably going to go up, and this Council has indicated that's something that they're certainly willing to support, and staff is taking those directions with respect to our own SDR, which is currently underway and will be completed by the end of November to meet the conditions of the grant that we received for $70,000. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Wade, I think, you know, I don't pretend to speak for everybody here, but I think we need to have an idea as to whether it's the governance model that is the impediment or the narrow focus that people historically have brought to the table. If you're looking at tweaking the governance model to give Shelburne more say, I think that's something that we can certainly talk about. If we're looking at going to a full Orangeville style model where our residents are essentially paying a fee for use of your facilities, I think we need to know that we're going in that direction. And I'm certainly in favor of further discussions about this, but will this be known prior to the completion of the study in November?
Not necessarily before. I mean, I'll be perfectly frank, Mr. Mayor. I think the direction that we're currently looking at is something perhaps closer to the Orangeville model, although a little bit different. One of the possible models that has sort of, taken on a bit of a life of its own through these discussions that we've had with the other municipalities is that what we could look at is sort of a hybrid model, I guess, in many ways, but where our municipal partners would still contribute some money for operation purposes on an annual basis, which would then preclude your residents from paying these one-off, non-resident surcharges every time they walk through the door. So it creates a bit of consistency, a bit of certainty on both sides in terms of budgeting. And then in terms of the representation factor, certainly I'm not opposed to looking at something like a Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee to Shelburne Council and including representation from the surrounding municipalities on that committee. So, it wouldn't be a board of management in the same sense that it is now, but it would be a Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee that would, be handed a fairly broad mandate, and would have the ear of council. So that, that's one possibility. But again, that's the whole reason that we're sort of doing these outreach meetings at this point, to gather some feedback and then, go back and regroup on our end and start to put some more details into place.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments? Wade, would you like to go to the fire board discussion at this point, or
Yep, sure.
are you looking for any further guidance from us? I think we're going to need to reflect on this and get back to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I said, I very much think this will be an ongoing, conversation, and even outside of formal meetings, Mr. Mayor, if there's thoughts that you have on behalf of council, pick up the phone anytime, and
yeah,
we can continue those conversations. In terms of fire services, and I mean, in many ways, I personally think that this issue is far less nuanced than the indoor rec discussion, and I hope everybody's had a chance to look at the county SDR report, because I think those folks, do a pretty commendable job in setting out, many of the justifications. So, essentially what we're looking at here, in the realm of fire services, it's strictly about trying to create more operational consistency when it comes to the governing legislation that fire services are subject to. The whole notion of these intermunicipal boards that tend to be kind of popular within Dufferin County, are really quite an oddity when you get outside of our area. They aren't something that's widely used within most of the rest of the province, other than in some smaller remote areas in northern Ontario. But we happen to have 3 of them kind of right in our neighborhood, 4 of them, I guess, actually, when you include Rosemont. And what I've heard from 2 successive fire chiefs now in the town of Shelburne is that you know, this poses some problems, even when it comes to simple tasks like filling out ministry reports, because the legislation just doesn't really contemplate the existence of these boards. What the legislation seems to contemplate is a municipal fire service, which, you know, sure other municipalities may lean on for support, but the whole basis is that the fire service itself is managed and operated as, you know, essentially a municipal department. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing is bringing this fire service in-house as part of our existing municipal structure. The fire chief would become an employee of the town of Shelburne as opposed to an employee of a board, and would report accordingly. Shane is our member on the fire board, so I'm going to let him jump in here because he has some more intimate knowledge of the way things are currently going. And then I think Denise also has some comments with respect to fire when it comes to sort of that operational structure, and how a streamlined approach may help us going forward. So Shane, if you want to chime in on this one.
Certainly. So with regards to the current structure, just using one of the examples, with regards to our treasurer/secretary, she actually has a dual reporting role. She reports basically to the board, and then most recently she's now doing some specific items that are only related to her reporting to the fire chief. So it creates a situation where you've got one person that actually has, in a sense, two bosses, and trying to do that balance. Within, we also have identified some issues on the board, specifically with, you know, maybe what I would characterize as a lack of management from the board perspective. The treasurer, she was in her position for 5 years and had not received a performance review, no pay increases as such, etc. So I think there's a much better way for us to look at this in a streamlining fashion, so that we as a board don't get caught into what potentially could become some other form of legal related items based on the fact because of the board structure itself. I think, again, the overall service itself, what the actual department does isn't going to change at all, but it's just that structure behind the scenes that I do believe needs some attention. And this, again, is one of those ways in which we can close any of those gaps, legal or otherwise.
Thank you. Denise, did you have something to add on this?
No, I don't actually. The mayor and Councillor Hall have captured all of it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Fred?
Yes, Your Worship, I've got three broad questions, unless you think I'm going on too long, in which case I will back off. I was going to, the three areas I would like to question are service levels, costs, and the mechanics of dissolving the fire board. Now, Shane just essentially almost answered my first question. I was going to ask, if Shelburne were to take over the fire board, would service to the northwest corner of Mono change at all? And I think Shane just addressed that. He said service levels would not change, so I can dispense with the first question. The second question has to do, and again, Wade and Shane, I mean, I understand you're doing your service delivery study. You have to be concerned with the residents in Shelburne. I have to be concerned with the residents of Mono. So what I want to know, if the service level doesn't change, would costs change? My assumption, this is an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, if you were to take over the fire board, you would be charging Mono on a per call basis. That's essentially how we pay Orangeville now, although the mechanics are a bit more complicated because we used to pay on a per call basis. Now they take the number of calls we've had per year and they multiply by a number, and we pay them quarterly. I'm assuming you would be thinking of some model like that, but the question I have to ask you is if we get the same service in Mono, would our costs go up?
I mean, that's hard to answer at this point, Fred. You know, until we sort of, you know, run through that. And I think, you know, that's probably an exercise best left to our respective staffs to sort of work through. My initial gut reaction would be, you know, not likely. You know, I don't see, you know, anything that would trigger an immediate increase in cost. Now, over time, you know, obviously, just as your contribution as a member of the board goes up on an annual basis, you know, I think it would be quite reasonable to expect that over time costs will go up, but you know, simply as a function of dissolving the board and moving from a board structure to a municipal service, you know, there's nothing inherent in that model change that I see that would trigger a cost increase for you folks.
Well, with respect, could I just put some numbers on the table? And I know you're going to say that we don't know the cost just yet, but this is what concerns me in the back of my mind. Last year, budget year 2020, we paid $53,000 to the Shelburne District Fire Board. We had 33 fire calls in that year. If Shelburne were to take over the fire board and start to charge us in a manner similar to the way Orangeville charges us, and again, my numbers aren't precise, but their formula is it's actually over $4,000 a call. I think Les is online. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not important for the sake of these examples. If I take 33 calls times $4,000, that's $132,000. That's more than double the $53,000 that we paid in 2020. Now, I'm not saying that is what's going to happen, but that's the thing in the back of my mind that scares me. Once Shelburne takes over the fire service, we have absolutely no control over the cost that we pay for it. Just to further that example, in one single year, Orangeville increased our fire call rate by 25%. So that, again, Wade, I understand we don't have the numbers yet, but you have to appreciate that if I'm to look after the interests of my residents in Mono, that's the thing that scares me. My third question, Your Worship, is I want to understand the mechanics of how you think we could dissolve the fire board. There's nothing in the 1991 agreement that specifically speaks to how you would dissolve a fire board. There's provisions if a member left the fire board. There's a provision if we all dissolve the fire board in terms of what happens to our assets. But there's nothing that says actually mechanically how you would dissolve it. So I'd like to hear from you. Let's say we agreed with you. What would Mono have to do? I mean, the danger, of course, is if you simply said, well, drop out of the fire board. Hold it. Under the 1991 agreement, we leave all our assets on the table. So I can't see Mono agreeing to that. So how do you see the mechanics of dissolving the fire board?
Well, I mean, in terms of you know, the actual legal mechanics, you know, again, I think those are things that can be ironed out. I think what you're getting at, you know, really though, are the financial mechanics. Is that what you're more concerned about?
Well, I mean, the financial aspects of it are paramount, but I forget about them just for a second. I mean, would 4 municipalities have to pass basically a common motion or resolution? I mean, I just want to know what we legally would have to do to dissolve the fire board.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, Frank, we haven't done a deep dive into the actual, you know, procedural mechanics as to what would happen. That's you know, if at the end of this process, if everybody's on the same page, then I think it becomes a bit of a moot point anyways. But arguably, you know, to your point, I think if a majority of current members are desirous of dissolving the board, then it makes it awfully difficult for the remaining minority to carry on, you know, in any real sense anyways. So, again, not to diminish what you're asking, but I think that stuff will sort of work itself out over time, depending upon, what the respective moods of the municipalities are. In terms of the financial implications, because I think this is key, it's certainly no secret to you, because I think we talked about this different times when we were on the board together, that, in the event of a dissolution, that there's an expectation on the part of the individual municipalities who are members that there would be some sort of capital buyout, for the contributions that you've made over the years. And one of the things that I've sort of thrown out there, again, just at a very high level at this point, is that we could look at, I think, rather than an upfront, check that Shelburne cuts to Mono, we could look at sort of a longer term phase out where there's service, provided in lieu of that capital payout. So essentially, once we determine what amount is due and owing to Town of Mono, and again, that's an exercise for, our respective treasurers and staff to determine. But once that number is determined, then essentially the Town of Mono would receive a credit. Okay, so and could be viewed as like a retainer almost. And rather than you folks pay on a per call basis as you are in Orangeville, or pay on an annual basis for the provision of fire services, those services would be provided for a period of time until that credit essentially runs out. Okay, and again, I'm not saying that this is the only model that we can look at, but it's one I think worth exploring, because in all sincerity, I think it has benefits on both sides. The obvious benefit to the town of Shelburne is it avoids us having to, front end a whole lot of cost, right out of the gate. From your perspective, I mean, it certainly gives you folks a fair amount of certainty for X number of years, and that number can be filled in once we know what the capital payout would be. And it also would relieve some budget pressure for that same number of years under the fire service envelope. So again, that's one potential model that I think is worthy of some further discussion. But I do think it has some legs.
Okay, Your Worship, I said I had 3 questions and I've asked them, but if you could bear with me, my last question, Wade, is what are you expecting from the Town of Mono Council today?
Nothing. Basically what we're looking for is just to have a frank discussion. I mean, if there are concerns, if there are questions, that's what we're looking for today, because as I say, we're still kind of very much in the middle of this process on our end, and one of the commitments that we sort of felt was important at Shelburne Council was that we reach out to our partners early on in the process, so that the concerns that you folks have could be factored in, at an early stage, as opposed to being left, for afterthoughts. So we're just looking for some feedback today so that we can take that back, mix that into the ingredients that our consultants are going to be looking at, and then hopefully, we can find some solutions that are going to be appealable to everybody.
Sharon, I think I saw your hand up there at one point.
Well, actually, Fred has covered everything that I had in my mind, so I probably don't have to say anything. I found working on the board a very congenial group who get along really well. That's all I'd like to say, and I don't think that anything that Shelburne has wanted to do has been thwarted by outside influences and other municipalities. Yeah, and I am certainly glad that our secretary treasurer has, she's quite a remarkable woman actually, but it's not going to just one tiny thing. It doesn't change the fact that she would have 2 bosses, because she'd have Shelburne to be reporting to Shelburne and to the fire chief as well. The same thing, just different different people, I guess. But well, we'll see how it goes. I'm glad we're having this conversation. Thank you.
Ralph?
Wade, I've heard your explanation for the advantages and Shane's as well, and also I've read the review, the Dufferin County review, in which they said that it would reduce risks and find efficiencies. And when I talked to the representative about that, give me some details, he couldn't. It seemed to me it was a motherhood statement, and I'm not very convinced that there is a telling value to you, to Shelburne to do this. So my question is, is there an elephant in the room? Is there something else, some other reason why you want to do this?
No, and it's funny. We had a similar question at Melanchthon Council, and I'll give the same assurance to you that we did to Melanchthon. You know, that there is no hidden agenda here. You know, in both areas, indoor rec and fire, I think anybody who's been involved in either sphere knows that they aren't, you know, really known as being big revenue generators. So this certainly isn't a quest for additional revenue on the part of Shelburne. There are some legal and liability issues, and Denise is probably better versed at speaking to the details of those if she wants. And again, you know, it comes back to that operational structure, and you know, really what is contemplated under the legislation in the province of Ontario, and the fact that although this board that we're currently under has served its purpose and served its purpose well over the years, you know, has it essentially just outlived its useful life at this point, and the world has sort of moved on around us. To Councillor Martin's point, I would agree with you. You know, the board does, I think, kind of work well together, you know, as far as that goes. They are very congenial. I enjoyed my time on the board. But does that necessarily mean that, you know, that joint board is the best managerial structure for something like a fire service that carries the amount of liability that it does? And your other point about, you know, Shelburne not being thwarted in terms of advancing any projects that we wanted. Again, I agree with you, and that's not what this is about. That may be a part of the indoor rec discussion. That's not part of the fire discussion. You know, again, as Shane mentioned, the service as it stands, I think, continues essentially unchanged. It's just, you know, is there a better way to manage this fire service going forward that brings us a lot in line with you know, the rest of the province and the legislation that governs it.
So my next question, Your Honor, is, Wade, if you put yourself in my shoes, what does Mono gain by this?
I'm not sure any of us are really gaining anything on an individual basis. Like, again, you know, excuse me. I don't think there's a huge, you know, advantage to the town of Shelburne in terms of finances and in terms of anything else. It's basically just trying to find a better way of managing this fire service. And at the end of the day, we're all beneficiaries of that.
Well, I'd like to make a comment, because I've been on the fire board at Rosemont for the last 7 years. I've been the chair for a couple of years. So I have a fairly intimate understanding of the workings of that fire board, and fire boards may not all be the same, but I think it works extremely, extremely well. I don't think it's something whose time has passed. I'm really surprised at that comment from you, because I don't think that the important thing is whether it's working for us or not. What's happening with the rest of the province? Well, that's interesting, but it's not necessarily germane here. We have 3 municipalities in Rosemont. I know we're not talking about Rosemont today, but we have 3 municipalities, and they all have their input. And sometimes there's strong disagreements, but we recognize that they all have a valid input, and we come up with solutions to the issues. And in terms of cost, I mean, these people sit on the board and they run the board, and there's no cost to any particular municipality. They all pay it for it because they're all councillors from the town. I find this to be a suggestion to be a little disturbing because we've been working together as municipalities, as a large community, all the municipalities together, and I see this as a retrograde step. I think that we need to be very careful about this because it's having these cooperative efforts within the town of Dufferin, I think is extremely good for the social fabric of the community.
One question, Councillor Menkel, if I may, Your Worship.
Yes. Go ahead.
You know, one of the things that I think the consultants had hit on is, you know, legal issues, liability issues. Notwithstanding what you said about, you know, the board functioning well and everything else, I mean, have you ever been troubled in any sense that the board is, you know, being put in a position to make decisions that it may not potentially have the requisite training for, or you know, the intimate knowledge, and therefore, you know, potentially opening itself or its component municipalities up to undue liability?
Well, I think that's a good question, and certainly one with considerable weight. You have to recognize that each of us are members of council, and we have access to people on our staff. We have access to legal support if we need to. I've gone to Les a number of times because I needed advice on the financial aspect of it. So that's an example of where I didn't feel that I was left out on my own. I felt that I have I'm a representative of Mono, and I can call on all of the supports that Mono can give me. So the answer is no.
Fred?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One, Wade, there is an elephant in the room, and it's the fire hall. Whether you take over the fire service or whether we continue with the Shelburne District Fire Board, we've got a problem 6 or 7 years down the road. That building, we've had an engineer look at it. We can't add a second floor. The footprint of the land we own there is not large enough to build a new building. So whether you own it or the board owns it, we're looking at a bill of about $5 million in the next, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years. The other comment I have, Your Worship, and Ralph, I agree with what you just said, but I'd like to put something on the table for Wade's benefit, because I've been on the Shelburne District Fire Board now for over 11 years. What Wade says about being kind of an anomaly of having fire boards is true. I know when we had that, when the fire marshal's office made us do that awful thing about all the reporting and files and stuff, the fire marshal's office does not like us. They do not like fire boards. They would prefer that fire departments run by the municipality. That sounds like I'm jumping ship here, Ralph, and supporting Shelburne and what they're saying. But I just thought that should be put on the table, because Wade is quite correct when he says that. But having said that, Ralph, I agree with what you just said about working together as a community. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any further comments, Wade?
Yeah, if I may, Your Worship. Fred, that's a good point, and I was actually going to bring that up at some point, that, you know, those recommendations from the fire marshal's office, which, you know, predate my involvement in local politics, but I want to say they were sort of late 90s. Does that sound about right?
Wade, I'm well into my 70s and my memory is terrible.
Ballpark, though, you know, we're probably looking at somewhere, you know, 20 years.
No. I've only been on the fire board 11 years, and it was 8 or 9 or 10 years ago that this happened.
Okay. So it's maybe happened more than once then. But I think one of the things that we maybe should be cognizant of as well is that, knowing that the fire marshal's office is not a big fan of this structure, knowing that the legislation does not really contemplate, the kind of behavior that we're engaged in right now, it's likely not a stretch to consider a day where the province may say, look, this is not the way it's going to happen anymore, and these joint boards must be dissolved. And, I, for one, would much rather sort of work through the process on our own, but before that's mandated, as opposed to being told that this is going to be so, and here's the deadline by which it must happen. So, just some additional food for thought that, if that is, the true feelings of the province and those who, sort of exercise influence over what we're doing, maybe we should structure a solution ourselves before the time comes where we're told what that structure is going to look like.
Thank you. And if I could just make one brief comment, and that is that the joint board model many, many years ago was seen as an alternative to the county assuming responsibility for such things as recreation and fire services. And rightly or wrongly, the assumption was that we wanted to have a closer connection to those services than what the county administration would at the time, and I'm going back to the 1990s, would have afforded. So there is a good reason for the joint board model locally. And I have to echo the suggestions that any joint boards that I've been on, and Rosemont was one of them in its very early days, worked very well. And Rosemont, of course, is slightly different because it's basically a department that delivers services to adjacent municipalities as well. Wade and Shane and Denise, I'd like to thank you for your attendance here today. It's certainly going to cause us to have some reflection and further discussions on these two topics. Is there anything that you'd like to say in conclusion?
No, thank you very much for your time, and as I say, we'll take the feedback that we've heard today back to our corner, and as I mentioned earlier, if there are any other thoughts that permeate over time, by all means, pass them along. And as we sort of advance through this process, I'd like to do this again, and see where we end up.
And I'd like to encourage staff discussions on this as well. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you very shortly. Soon.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much. It's 9:52 and our public meeting for planning purposes commences at 10. So I think there might be one or two matters that we can deal with in advance. Going to item number 5 on the agenda, unfinished business and deferred items. We have the list of unfinished and deferred council business. Are there any comments or questions about that list today? Fred?
Just on the joint water management agreement, there is now a meeting scheduled among the 4 municipalities for October the 4th, and Mark and I will be attending.
Terrific. Any other items under the Ralph?
Just a request from Mark to for a little background information. I think he knows what I'm going to ask, but the fill bylaw was going to be presented. The due date was October. Now it's moved to January. Could you give us a little back behind the scenes? What's the problem there?
I think a lot of that was through discussions we were having in terms of prioritizing council business and dealing with that. The fill bylaw has not, I guess fill issues have not been prominent through the summer, and it was felt that it was one of the items that could be bumped back to assist council and staff work through a backlog of issues.
Ralph, I'll take some responsibility for that because I was urging staff to identify items that were not as pressing as maybe some others are. And I think since the amendments to our fill bylaw, some of the issues, but not all of the issues, have been addressed.
That's fine.
Anything else under this item?
No.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break before we commence the public meeting at 10 a.m. Thank you. And I'm just waiting for Sharon to return. Sharon, are you there?
You want me to phone her?
May not be a bad idea. Thank you.
I'm in the process of texting her right now.
Okay. What is the wish of councillors? We do have a quorum. We could proceed. Fred?
Yeah, it's 10:03, 10:04. I think we should proceed.
Okay. So welcome back, everyone. And the next item on the agenda is a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act. And I have a motion that we adjourn the regular meeting of council and go into a public meeting to discuss zoning bylaw amendment ZBA 2021-01 wedding venue, Dandex Holdings, Inc. Do I have a mover for that motion? Moved by Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Mactolo. Did I see your hand up?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any opposed to convening the public meeting under the Planning Act? Seeing none opposed, the motion is carried. And we are now in a statutory public meeting to discuss a zoning bylaw amendment. I'm going to first call on the applicant, Mr. Dandy, or his representative, to make a brief presentation with regard to the application, followed by our planner, and then followed by members of the public who are online. Mr. Dandy, are you online?
Good morning, Mr. Fielding. This is Melanie Horton. Mr. Dandy is online. I'm Melanie Horton from Escher Planning, representing the applicant this morning.
Thank you. Please proceed. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And Andrew, I think if you give me the ability to share screen, I can. I have a presentation that I can share with everyone. Should also be in council's agenda package as well.
Yes.
Just see if we can get the right item here. How's that? Is that visible for everyone? Getting used to this technology here for GoToMeeting.
Yes, I believe we can see it.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity this morning to speak to this item, the zoning bylaw amendment. I understand Mr. Trotman has also provided a staff report, which he'll go through, but I'd like to just provide an overview of the proposal and give you some context about the process to date, including the applicant's ongoing efforts in working to address some of the concerns that have arisen. And also, I'd like to share some examples of similar proposals in other rural areas in other parts of Ontario and how those have been approached. I would mention, as you've seen here, Bill Dandy, who's the landowner, is here with us this morning, as well as Alex Collins, who's been working very closely with Bill throughout the process. Also, Carlos Jung and Roman Dumoulin are two of the noise acoustic engineers who've been engaged more recently. And all of us are happy to answer any questions following the presentation and Mr. Trotman's report. So the property is located on the south side, on the north side of Highway 9, just west of 4th Line, approximately 4 hectares in size. Existing structures include a residential dwelling and accessory structures, including a frame barn and log cabin. And access to the site, there was an entrance off Highway 9, which is at the request of MTO been essentially closed except for emergency access. And so the access now, the primary access is off the 4th Line, very close to Highway 9. Surrounding land uses, as you'll see from the air photo, include agricultural primarily, as well as rural residential uses. And there are also a number of highway commercial uses to the west of the site, closer to Orangeville. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would allow the site to be used as a venue to host seasonal outdoor weddings. And seasonal, we're looking at a period from May 1st to October 31st of any given year, Saturday events only. The weddings would be for groups of up to 80 people with event space to include a tent, and the tent is generally erected under permits for each wedding, for each event, and those are obtained through the municipality. There's overnight accommodation on the site for up to a maximum of 16 guests, and the proposed parking here would accommodate up to 40 vehicles. I'd like to note there are no new buildings or structures proposed as part of this use, and the use would utilize temporary or portable porta potties for servicing to accommodate the guests for these events. In terms of background on this proposal, pre-submission consultation started about 2 years ago now with staff at the town. And there was an agency review, preliminary review at that time, and a series of comments provided, primarily to give the applicant instructions in terms of the studies and reports that would be required for staff to properly consider the amendment. So at that time, there were comments provided by the Ministry of Transportation, Dufferin County, Town of Mono Heritage Committee, Public Works Committee, Recreation Committee, and planning staff. In terms of Conservation Authority, this is not a regulated area, but the application was circulated to Nottawasaga, Toronto Region, and more recently Credit Valley Conservation. The jurisdiction is actually split between Toronto Region and CBC, so the property is divided between CBC and TRSA, so both of those authorities have provided comments. The application was formally submitted in February of this year, and it's supported by a planning justification report, site plan, and at that time a traffic impact study brief. The planning report, which I authored, includes an analysis of the proposed use in the context of provincial and local planning policy, including the provincial policy statement, the Greenbelt Plan, as well as the official plans for the county and the town. More recently, and in response to concerns that have been raised and direction from town staff, the applicant has also engaged other consultants to provide some supplementary information. That includes a noise assessment report, The noise report, I mentioned the noise engineers are here today. The acoustic engineering looked very specifically at impacts from music from events at the closest residence to the site and provided some specific recommendations of how the sort of best controls for noise from events to ensure that there's no impact on surrounding residents. An environmental letter was provided by Natural Resource Solutions Consulting. They concluded, based on their review, there would be no impacts on the natural heritage features in and around the property. They did suggest maintaining a 30-meter setback from the wooded areas on the site and monitoring of parking areas for soil compaction and erosion. The traffic brief addendum supported the original traffic report that was prepared by JD Engineering and confirmed the previous findings that traffic generated from events of 80 guests will not cause any operational issues or significant traffic delays. There's to be no northbound traffic on the 4th line. So the events would be using the access on 4th line and then traveling out to Highway 9, going either east or west from there. In addition, there was a light pollution analysis prepared by an engineer that evaluated impact on surrounding area based on, they looked at a worst case scenario. And their conclusion was that there would be no, what they call light trespass from events. They noted that the significant tree screening provides suitable light buffers. They also highlighted there are to be no fireworks, no sparklers, and all main lighting would be in the barn or the tent for the events. So my understanding is that staff now have received all of the supplementary information for this proposal. As Mr. Trotman has noted in his report, there may be ongoing review and or peer review of those reports, and I think we'll hear from him when I finish my presentation. So I'll go through these next few slides. I won't spend too much time here, but I did want to highlight for council that this proposal is not unique in the sense that rural wedding venues are becoming sort of an increasing use that's been requested in a number of municipalities across the province. It's a way for rural landowners and farmers to generate additional revenue in these areas. In most communities, it's seen as an economic benefit by staff and council. And in each of these cases, based on a review of uses in agricultural and rural areas, the proposals were found to be consistent with provincial policy. So you can see the monosite here sort of in the northern portion of this map, and I'll go through the 5 examples here. Initially, we have the Bradford Barn. This one is in the township of Bradford, West Willamberry. It's 40 hectares, so significantly larger than Bill's property. This is for events of up to 100 people and 72 vehicles. And there were concerns raised with, I think, virtually all of these proposals, very similar to the concerns that have been raised in the proposal in Mono, in terms of what would the effects be on neighboring residents from noise and traffic and environmental impact. And in each case, the municipality was able to, either through the zoning bylaw or through the review and through site plan control, determine that the impacts were able to be appropriately mitigated. The Bradford West Willamberry proposal this is 2019, so it was approved with a holding provision for site plan control. The next one is in Middlesex Center, just near London. Property here is 12 hectares, quite a bit larger venue, up to 200 people. So more than double what we're proposing, and parking for over 100 vehicles. Municipal staff did note and highlight the economic and tourism benefits of this use. This one was approved in 2019. In the town of Erin, we have the Erin Estates wedding venue, again, 2019. This is also site-specific agricultural zone that was approved. This property is very similar in size to Bill's site at just over 5 hectares. There are also significant natural heritage features on the property, including a significant woodland and wetland, provincially significant wetland in the corner of the property. So those were, evaluation of impacts was included as part of the review. This site is approved for up to 160 guests with parking for 50 vehicles. And there's 2 more, I think. So Thatcher's Barn, this one is in Guelph-Hermosa property. This is the largest of the sites we looked at. just over 55 hectares, up to 140 guests and parking for 66 vehicles. This one was approved this year in June. The zoning did include, this is of note here, was able to include a limit on seasonal use, and they specifically referenced the May 1st to October 31st time period. And the bylaw also stipulates no music after 11 p.m. Finally, the Rose Hill Wedding Barn in Woodstock, Township of Southwest Oxford, approved in 2017 as a special agricultural zone. This one is up to, let's see that my screen's covered there, and parking for up to 65 vehicles. So in summary, as I mentioned, this is what we're proposing is sort of a trend that we've seen in a number of rural municipalities throughout the province. In each case, municipal staff and council have recognized these uses as a benefit in terms of diversified farm use, economic benefit, and a tourism benefit. And again, the concerns that have been raised with our proposal were echoed in each of the proposals that I presented this morning in terms of traffic, noise, how to service the events, emergency response, potential for permanent use of tents, and impact of farming operations. And in each case, the review concluded that there were mechanisms through the zoning bylaw and through site plan control to appropriately mitigate and control those impacts. They're all zoned now as site-specific agricultural zones. I'm not going to read these comments, you have them in your package, but these are just some of the sentiments that were expressed either in council's notes or in media articles on the proposals, and you'll see there that generally there's been a sort of a welcoming and more positive response to these proposals that I've presented this morning. So I just, that's the slide you're looking at here is a picture of Bill's property on Highway 9 and 4th line. I do want to say that Bill and the team that he's put together have been working diligently with staff at the town over the past 2 years in an effort to address all of the questions and the concerns that have been arisen. As you'll note from your package and on the website, there are several letters of support that have been provided from members in this community, including business owners and community leaders that have come forward to put in writing their expression of support. I do want to say that at the planning committee meeting, there were some neighbor concerns raised. I would note their closest neighbor directly across the road has not raised any concerns and has no objection with this proposal. They would be the most impacted in terms of any noise or traffic impacts. And Bill most certainly respects all the concerns that have been raised by the neighbors living closest to the site. And he's done what he can and taken steps to ensure that any of the potential impacts from noise, traffic, impacts on the environment have been considered thoroughly. And we're confident that they can be appropriately mitigated and controlled through the implementing zoning bylaw. So in our submission, and consistent with the other examples that I've presented this morning, we believe that the controls in the zoning can adequately address issues that have been brought forward. And we're looking for council support to allow this use to continue. We're pleased at this point to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do any members of council have any questions at this time, or would you like to hear from our planner and then ask questions of either Fred Nix?
Just, I'm curious about one thing, and I can't flip them all up at the screen at the same time, but when you ran through the places where they do now do wedding venues, I'm struck by the fact that the number of parking spaces is so limited compared to the number of guests. In fact, that last one you showed had, well, again, I can't get the screen up, but 65 parking spaces for 250 guests. But the thought that I, when I looked at those numbers as you went through them, and those are just for guests. What about the staff or the service vehicles and things like that? I mean, there's got to be more vehicles than 65 to have 250 guests. I just don't know how it works mechanically. I'm not dealing specifically with the proposal before us. I'm just dealing with these other ones. How do they handle all these vehicles?
Yeah, if you'd like, I can just respond to that quickly. So that most of and it's a very good point. The question has come up also in the other proposals. So the parking that is been organized for each of the other proposals is for guests that would be staying for the duration of the event. And so they have looked at the vehicles that would be staying for the full duration. So for example, a caterer or a disc jockey, but staff that are involved in setup, setting up a tent, for example, or bringing in tables and chairs, those vehicles would be coming onto the site and then leaving while the event was ongoing. So that's, I believe that's how it's been looked at for each of those proposals.
Any other members of council with questions? Ralph?
Thank you. Melanie, I understand there's overnight accommodation there. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, yes, perhaps I can ask Alex or Bill to provide details on that. They're more familiar with the overnight accommodations. Bill, would you mind?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Dandy. Ralph, the house has a the property has an old Victorian home on the property, and it has accommodations for 16 people, so it can sleep 16 people. So the basis of the wedding is to have the wedding party stay very close and connected, and then the other guests are entering the property for the day of.
Right. You mentioned using porta potties for guests. I guess that's the guests on the ground. The overnight guests would probably, I would not expect, would use that, and they'd probably be using the present septic system. Can you tell us about the adequacy of that?
The septic system allows for this amount of people in the house. It is a 4-bedroom home. So throughout the years, that would have been calculated in order to manage that amount of waste. So yeah, we refrain 100% from anyone else using that because we want to protect that and its integrity for as long as possible. So it's just the people that are using the house, and in times where there's no, they rent are typically these very nice, luxurious executive type ones, and they can actually use that to take any additional strain off our septic.
Well, to go back to the accommodation, this is functioning as an overnight. It's not an Airbnb. It's functioning as a once a week hotel. Is that more or less what it is?
I don't know how you would classify it, Ralph, in a sense, but they are accommodations for immediate family, and it's something where it adds value to the property because the immediate family can take time to enjoy each other's company, right? Prepare for the wedding and so forth. So I don't know how to classify it, or if I would give it a classification other than it's accommodations for the family, you know, in order to be together during the wedding venue.
Any other questions before we turn it over to Dave Trotman? Mark?
First of all, hi, Melanie, long time. I have 3 questions. One, just to follow up on Councillor Mankelo's. How many of the other uses that you identified, the wedding venues, are based on transient, temporary type facilities such as tents and porta potties? That's my first question.
All of them. So each of the 5 events that I shared with everyone this morning, those would all be a situation where there's a tent. In some cases, there's a barn on the site that's used to host ceremonies, but they've all contemplated use of tent structures for events.
And this is just a comment you made. I was curious as to how you'd control traffic leaving the site and not moving north on 4th line. I'm not aware of what kind of mechanism you'd use for that other than a site plan requirement that becomes very difficult to enforce.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So there's the site plan control is one possibility together with signage, but Bill also has a contract for each of the groups that are coming in to have these events, and the no traffic northbound on 4th line can be embedded in those contracts as a stipulation, as a requirement, together with a whole host of other contractual obligations. If somebody wants to host an event, they need to agree to those terms.
And my last one was, if council did approve the application, would you be averse to a temporary use zone going on that to basically, prove what you're saying is going to occur?
Also a good question, and in at least one of the examples I've presented, that was the exact approach that council took for the very purpose that you've noted here, to sort of see, if you want to call it a probationary period, to ensure that the controls that have been contemplated are working effectively, and that temporary use gives some time for the municipality to assess and ensure that it's working. So I wouldn't be averse. I'm not sure, Bill, if that would be any concern to you, but I would have no concern with that, Mark.
Thank you. Those were my questions, Your Worship.
Thank you. Dave, would you like to take us through your recommendations?
Thank you, Mayor Krillman. Well, I've written a fairly extensive report, as you can see, and I guess a few things come to mind. I've weighed in on the recommendation with respect to frequency, of course, noise. That was a key theme that came up at the August 19th Planning Committee meeting. I think Melly's given a fairly fulsome presentation. I guess my only comments I'm going to make are these, and that would be, so again, as I mentioned, frequency. I think council needs to evaluate the policy tests under our official plan, particularly under 15.3 and E, which speak to resource-based commercial and then institutional type uses. That's one key policy theme that has been identified in my report. I suppose too, there's a whole notion of, is this a rural, or should it be, or can it be a rural special use versus a commercial use? That's a question. On that note, OMAFRA, with their Bulletin 851 guideline to agriculture and agriculture-related uses, doesn't say too much about wedding venues, but they do put tests in place with respect to where on-farm diversification or agriculture-related. And a couple of the themes are, they can't be large, and they speak also to frequency. And of course, I don't know, I can't speak too much about the other existing operations, but I know that one or two of them at least are related to existing farm operations. And I think the policy framework under the PPS, and particularly under OMAFRA policy, may support that type of use where there's a ongoing farming operation in order to give some promotion or value to farming in Ontario, and they see not necessarily a symbiotic relationship, but a relationship that allows people to better understand farming. And I think OMAFRA, in their policy framework, and that bulletin sort of speaks to that or relates to that. The other thing I'm going to say too is that in my experience, entrenching conditions in an agreement of some form or another sometimes only works for a period of time. Ultimately, the site and the design elements of the site have to work. to actually mitigate noise as opposed to we don't want you to make noise above such a decibel level or frequency on a Saturday. So the design elements need to control it. And I think I alluded to my report about proactively dealing with things like that. Other than that, I mean, I think my recommendation stands. I think Planning Committee, in their review of this on August 19th, took a very reflective and fulsome approach. The comments that came through were well formed and well vocalized, in my view. To Mark's point, if council is going to consider this at all, I've almost said from the get-go, or thought at least from the get-go, that if this were to happen, it absolutely should be on a temporary basis in the short term. That would be my strong position with respect to any support, is that if it's going to happen, it should be on a temporary use basis. Whether that's a year or two, I don't know, it needs to be beyond that. That would be the length of my position in terms of a support. I believe that because the site's on Highway 9, there's a sense that it's automatically lending itself to this kind of use. But I think if we look at our policy tests, in particular under 15 under rural policies, I don't know, I still have questions as to whether it supports those policies with respect to links to local mono economic development interests, you might say. I'm open to questions.
Any questions for Dave? Ralph?
To go back to section 15, I'd really like, Dave, you to interpret section 15 in the light of this application, because it seems to me to suggest that small scale, I shouldn't say suggest, but it states that small scale commercial uses, which I think this is probably the closest classification this fits into that I could see, are not allowed if they can be located in the town's settlement area. That's what it says in section 15.3, that they're not allowed if they can be located in the town's settlement area. Does that not apply to this application?
I would say it does, and it's in my report for that reason. I don't see a resource-related aspect to it, to be honest with you.
So this is a problem with the application, then. That's what you're agreeing.
I agree.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Fred?
Well, not a question so much, but I'm not a planner, so I thank you, David Department, for your report and forcing me to spend an hour or 2 hours reading the growth plan, or the Greenbelt plan, and the Dufferin official plan, and the town's official plan, and the provincial policy statement. It was very exciting reading. My trouble is that when I read those plans and what is allowed or not allowed in a rural area, they use phrases like, yes, some commercial activities permitted, but it has to be compatible with the rural landscape. And, at that point, I throw my hands up in the air. I don't know what you planners mean when you say compatible. When I look at our own official plan, yes, we would allow some small scale commercial activities. And I look at the application, I think 80 guests and I forget how many cars. Gee, is this the definition of small scale? My concern is, if we do think it is, and aren't we setting a precedent for future applications? My final concern, and this is quite frankly what made up my mind, is section 15.3E of our policy. And I agree with Ralph. And again, my concern is, if we allow this application, we're setting a precedent, because it quite clearly says, yes, you can have small scale commercial activities in a rural area only if they are things that couldn't be done in a settlement area. And I have to believe that wedding venues could be done in a settlement area. So I think our policy puts paid to this application. I'm sorry, but unless someone can convince me otherwise, that's where my mind's at.
Thank you. Sharon, do you have any thought?
I did have thank you. I did have a question, I guess, for Melanie and for Bill, and that is this functioning as an Airbnb at this time? The information that I get when I go online certainly indicates that. And I also went online a while ago and saw how beautiful the rooms were and all of those kind of things. But now I can't get it. It's disappeared. So I'm just wondering if you could.
Hi, Sharon. Yeah, hi, Sharon. Thanks for your question. So in light of your question, yes, we've had pressure to remove listings based on the township's order. So they're not there anymore because we cannot rent them anymore. So that answers your first question. Your second question is, yes, we're still attempting to bring people in up from the city to reconnect with each other and nature. So yeah, it's still within limited capacity, still operating as a short-term rental. If there's any negative connotation with Airbnb, because Airbnb is like your Xerox or Kleenex now of short-term rental. So we don't want to always say it's an Airbnb. It could be considered a short-term rental if Airbnb has any negative, impact with people. So yeah. So yes, that one is no longer being rented, Sharon.
Okay.
I had a question.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
John. So let me answer your question because I did prepare something for yourself and the council to say before we finish. So please go ahead, Mayor.
I just have one quick question and for Dave. I saw a reference in a report to reconstruction of the road leading down to Highway 9. Do we have any sense of what's involved in that and the potential costs and who would bear it?
Thank you, Mayor Creelman. I did get some comments from our good engineer, Carly Dixon. She actually managed to muster some comments in a very short period of time on the reports that were more recently submitted. She alludes to the fact that there should be upgrades. If this were to happen, upgrades on the 4th line from the property to 9th, Highway 9. But it hasn't really gone beyond that, of course, because the technical aspects of that would be borne through perhaps some measure of the amendment if it were to occur, but certainly on the site plan control application, which would be part and parcel of any approved amendment, temporary or otherwise.
Thank you. Bill, did you have any concluding remarks before I ask the public for comment?
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor Creelman, town councilors, and all their participants. My name is Bill Dandy. I represent Dandex Holdings, Inc., and I've worked with an experienced team in order to win your trust, along with support, allowing us to operate outdoor weddings on the property. I'm a proud family man, businessman, and humanitarian. My daughter works in the archives at the FASCO, and my son is completing his final year at Osgoode Hall, following his father's footsteps. My father's footsteps, sorry, who is a retired Superior Court of Ontario judge. Since 1997, I've run a business that operated in Caledon and now Orangeville. Last year, I stepped back from the leadership role to devote my time to the most pressing matter in our society. I feel the solution to reverting our climate crisis is by creating a greater connection between one another and a stronger connection with nature. I use Ketchum House, an off-grid sustainable home in Hockley Valley, as a means to illustrate when we live respectfully on the earth and respect one another, this is the path to a healthy planet. The outdoor wedding venue is an extension of my Ketchum plan. By providing this service, we employ local people, support local business, and bring a new group of consumers into our region. Not only that, during the wedding weekend, we are connecting people and connecting those guests to nature. In closing, I like to comment on the remarks from neighbors. Some stated strong accusations regarding my disrespect for the safety of the property and the surrounding neighbors. First, I've never abused or disrespected any part of this planet and never will as I fight to save our home. Secondly, I respected each neighbor and communicated with them along the way. Our closest neighbor at 833006 Fourth Line could be directly impacted as their driveway is across from us. This family is not participating in any of these public proceedings and supports the new use. It feels as though distant neighbors are simply averse to change. As we know, positive change is good and needed. I vow, in addition to my team, mitigating every concern. I will personally ensure a respectful local environment, especially with regards to the aspect of noise. We will implement sound suppression technologies, monitoring systems, and on-property staff to create a quiet environment and a strong, long-lasting relationship with our neighbors. I ask the council to support our proposal to operate outdoor weddings at 207535 Highway number 9 in the beautiful town of Mono. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Dandy. If there are any other questions or comments, if there are none, I'd like to ask any member of the public who may be listening in on this meeting whether or not they wish to participate. Last chance. Anyone wishing to participate? I should indicate that in addition to the letters of support that have been referred to, the town has received a number of communications from local neighbors, both written and oral, on this application. If there's no one online.
I'm sorry, I stepped away from my computer for a minute. What is the topic right now?
It's the application for the wedding venue.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's not me, sorry.
Okay. So last chance of council to ask any questions or make any statements. Okay, I have a motion that we close the public meeting and resume the regular meeting of council to consider the application. Do I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Nix. Seconder, Sharon Martin. Any opposed? The motion is carried. And discussion of council, any further discussion before I read a proposed motion? So I have a prepared motion that gives us two choices. And the wording of the motion is as follows. Council deny the application of ZBA 2021-01 wedding venue, Dandex Holdings, Inc., or alternatively, that council defers a decision on application ZBA 2021-01 wedding venue, Dandex Holdings, Inc., pending peer review of the reports recently submitted by the applicant. Do I have a mover for that that motion?
Your worship, on a point of order, you've given us a choice of two motions. So I don't know how anyone can move or second that. I think we have to pick one or the other to put on the floor and then discuss it.
Okay. Is there a wish of council that we deal with one over the other? Yes, Deputy Mayor?
I would be prepared to move the first motion that we deny the application.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Manctolo is the seconder. And to clarify, that is only on the motion to deny the application. Discussion? Councillor, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, as I stated earlier, my concern, I mean, I wish Mr. Dandy all the best in creating places for wedding venues that put people in touch with nature. But my concern with this particular application is that we will be setting a precedent for two things under our official plan. One is, what is small scale commercial? And this application really ups the ante on the definition of that. And it also sets a precedent in terms of our policy of saying, yes, you can do small-scale commercial in rural areas, only if you couldn't do them in a settlement area. And this application, if we approve it, would set a precedent for all future applications. So that's why I'm against it.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, I saw your hand up.
There were a number of things that weren't addressed when in Dave Trotman's report, and things such as what the county thinks about this, the paving of the road. There's so many things that are not answered. And in that case, I can't see this going forward. Not for me, anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Mantalo?
In some ways, I'm inclined towards the application, but I don't think that we have the capability of doing this given our official plan. I note also that the PENHAC has recommended not accepting it, and that puts some weight on. I noticed that many of the, maybe all of the venues that Bill had outlined, or Melanie had outlined, that are do not have any people living around them. They're basically a larger area, or they're sitting with farmland all around them, so that the noise issue has been brought up by a number of residents, and I recognize that as being a problem. I can't support this at this time, from what I've heard.
Thank you. I have a number of concerns. The first, which has been identified and discussed at some length, the 15.3E, seems to preclude it on the face of it. The other concern that I have, and I have to acknowledge that it is not a planning principle per se, but applications that attempt to normalize an ongoing situation, or an attempt to make right a situation that really shouldn't have started until approvals were received, trouble me. And we are seeing an increasing number of those in the town, and that is of concern. But I want to be clear, that is not a planning principle per se. But I think the references to 15.3E are legitimate in this instance, and I will not be supporting the application for that reason. So I have a motion on the floor, moved by Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Mantalo, that we deny the application. All those in favor of denying the application? And that motion is carried. Thank you, Bill, for the attendance here today. I know it didn't go the way that you had hoped, but I think you've heard candidly from members of council that this application is not one that we can support.
Thank you, Mayor. May I speak candidly as well?
Go ahead, sir.
So when we started this, it was over 2 years ago, and I went to a couple of the trusted people within Mono to ask advice. And I feel that with considerable amount of money invested in time and invested, that advice was not correct. If it was this clear at the beginning, you would have saved us so much time, so much energy, and so much money. Why wasn't this clearly outlined by somebody at that point in time? This 15E point within the bylaws, or whatever they're called, policy.
Well, I can't directly answer that question, Bill, but anyone is obviously free to make any planning application they wish. There is no degree or certainty to it being approved, and we have spent a lot of time considering the application. Our committee was unanimous in its recommendation, and council is unanimous in its decision here today.
I appreciate that, but this is a black and white issue, Mayor. It's basically something that your group knew of, right? This 15E position, and we're just finding out about it now instead of at the point when we wanted to start this process. I just don't understand that part. I need some consolation on that because, yeah, this has been a long time with a lot of money spent. To hear that it's black and white, and maybe Dave, you can speak upon that. I see you're online now, Dave.
I can. I think that's something you should reflect with your good planning consultant. It should be part of the original PGR and leading up to any application is to undertake a review of the policy framework and weigh in on that before an application is made. I don't need to say any more than that.
I appreciate that, Dave. I felt that, we're in the same community, right? I'm talking about connecting people. And I felt no connection at this point in time with regards to having some insight to what we could be doing otherwise than wasting our time and spending it on this.
Bill, we have to move on to other matters, but I will repeat what I said, and that is anyone is free to make any kind of application they wish. And the application, the onus is on the applicant to make a demonstration as to why it either conforms to our existing planning regime, or if it doesn't, how that planning regime should be changed. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for the clarity.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes before our next scheduled planning meeting. Is it the wish of council that we undertake one or two items in advance of 11 o'clock?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So we have an item under item 6, and it's a donation towards a non-workplace injury of one of our valued employees. I'd like to speak in favor of us proceeding with this, with the opportunity of members of council contributing towards it. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments on that? Councillor Ranklow?
I think this is a very valuable thing to do, and support that we as individuals in the town should do.
Fred?
Yeah, and I just, to fill you in, I have talked to Public Works. The employee who was injured is seasonal, so he has no benefits under our benefit plan. I don't know what his financial situation is like, but he has no salary right now. And I did, in talking to Public Works, they are hopeful that the employee will be back up and running by the time the snow flies, so he can drive a snowplow again. So I'm fully in support of this. In fact, do we need to suggest an amount in the motion, Your Worship?
I don't see the absolute necessity of that, other than if there is a amount of monies from the town involved. I think we have to be transparent on that. By the same token, we won't know what that is until each of us has had the opportunity to make a contribution ourselves.
Well, could I just then suggest that when we had an injured firefighter at the Shelburne District Fire Board, the town put $500 towards that person, and maybe that's the amount we should look at here.
I've lost visual contact with all of you, but anyone want to comment on that? I was hoping for an amount slightly more than that, but I'm in council's hands.
Your Honor,
Yes. Yes, Fred. Or Ralph, I should say, sorry.
okay. There's been some talk outside of council about this, and I think the direction it was going was that we as councillors would have the opportunity to make a contribution ourselves directly to the town probably, as well as the town, so that the total value of the support would be in excess of the 500. It might be twice that. And I'm quite comfortable with going in that direction.
And I've already given my check less.
Yeah. If the amount was 500, then we have the opportunity to top up that amount. Is that the suggestion of council? Sharon?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion. I can't remember, did we say 500 that's how much we're giving? Can we?
I think
at the town.
That's the concept on the floor. Mark, did you have anything?
No, I was going to say the staff are also doing a donation as well, so it could all come from the town as one. I think what was being suggested was there was 500 from council's donation budget, and then whatever council wanted donated plus whatever staff was going to donate, and we could provide that as one package to the employee.
Agreed.
Yep.
So I have a motion that council approves $500 donation to a town employee injured outside of the workplace. Do I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Mankalo. Any further discussion? Any opposed? And again, we wish the individual well. We understand he's making progress, but it was a very serious injury, and he is a valued member of our seasonal workforce. Thank you. If there's no one opposed, the motion carries. So the next item on the agenda is another public meeting, a non-statutory public meeting, but it is a public meeting nonetheless, to discuss the town's reaction to an NEC application with regard to a airsoft range. So I have a motion that we adjourn the regular meeting of council and go into a public meeting to discuss NEC development permit application DR 2021-2022 -243 by Mary Beth and Greg Heenan. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Magdalow, seconded by Councillor now Deputy Mayor Nix. Any opposed? The motion is carried. And I'm wondering if the Heenans are part of the phone call today.
I don't see them.
I don't see them either. Dave, do you have any indication as to whether they're going to participate in the public meeting?
I was under the impression they were. I believe the information was conveyed in terms of linking in, so I'm a little befuddled that they're not here. We could try and make a call.
I think we should. I know that some of the potential participants are on tight timelines themselves, so I would like to hear from the Heenans first, if in fact they can be reached, and then from yourself, and then from members of the public.
Should we call it a 5-minute recess?
Yes, let's do that. And my apologies. We'll resume at 5 minutes, 6 minutes past 11. Andrew, I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting on everybody else to come back. Here we are. Dave.
Mayor Krillman, thank you. Sorry for the short delay there. I just punched out an email to you and department heads. So I did manage to get a hold of Mary Beth Henning. They've decided, I'm going to guess this morning, if it was not last night, to remove the paintball field and accordingly their NEC DPA application 243. So I've requested her to send me an email to that effect.
Okay, I think we should probably go on air and have you repeat that if we can. Andrew, if you can connect us.
Thank you. I'll repeat that for you and for those in attendance. Andrew, thank you. So again, I was able to contact Mary Beth Henning, the owner or co-landowner of 487-233 Sideroad 30, where the paintball field has been in use. And she advised me just now, like 5 minutes ago on the phone, that they have decided to remove the paintball field and their related NEC application, Development Permit Application 243. Now, she didn't say the timing for removal. I wanted to get back online for council to let you know, so there wasn't a delay, but I suspect it's going to be immediately. I will get an email from her. I've asked for an email confirmation, and if it's not in there in terms of timing, I'll be sure to make sure there's a time deadline on that, of course, for removal of the field.
Thank you. Mark, do you have any thoughts as to how we proceed today? Seems that
I would say, yeah, it seems like the matter is going to resolve itself. I would think at this point in time, we should just be replying to the NEC that as to what has transpired this morning and put a hold on the application until it's been formally withdrawn.
Dave, can you construct something to the attention of the NEC that indicates that this is the state of our latest information and that we ask the NEC to inform us of any changes or withdrawals of the application? I don't see the point. I don't see the point in going ahead with the public meeting in view of the news that we've received, but by the same token, I want to see more in writing on this. Any members of council have any comments?
Well, I agree with what you just said, Your Worship.
Thank you. Ralph?
Does that?
Oh, thumbs up. I see two individuals online, Jeff Blaine and Mark Payne, who have an interest in this topic, and I'm presuming that they have each heard what has just transpired.
I have. Thank you, John. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. So I have a motion that we close the public meeting and resume a regular meeting of council. Do I have a mover? And that's Councillor Martin, and a seconder, Councillor Mangtalo. Any opposed to that resumption of regular business? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Next motion unnecessary. So returning to our regular schedule, the next item is the 2022 budget process. And as everyone knows, there have been some discussions as to whether we should proceed as previously indicated by Les, or whether we should have a little more time for people to address some of their individual departments, and also, I think very importantly, to give the new councillor an opportunity for a meeting or two before they're thrust into the into the budget process. Les, do you have any recommendations for us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a proposed new schedule, looking at the calendar, and then deferring the budget process a little bit does come into conflict with the Christmas season. So the schedule reflects that. Usually we do the COLA discussion at the second meeting in October on the fresh heels of StatsCan releasing it. I'm proposing that gets moved to the first meeting in November, so November 9th. And then I'll at least give a couple weeks for the new counselor to get their feet wet. Capital projects take up a lot of council's time at a meeting. I'm proposing we could break that up over 2 meetings. The November 23rd meeting being the second meeting, and then December 14th for another department. So basically the 2 big departments, roads, public works, and then recreation, split that capital presentation over the 2 meetings. I suggest we avoid the first meeting in January. I'm kind of thinking a hangover from the Christmas holidays. So perhaps have a council meeting at the second meeting in January, January 25th. After that, usually after the first presentation by staff of the budget to council, we have a public input meeting where the public has their opportunity to discuss the proposed budget with council, put in their input. I don't have a date for that, so it'd be sometime would be determined at that point with council. It'd be into February, and then the budget approval at the latest February 22nd. So the second meeting of council. Normally, it's been on just a tradition. There's no legal requirement. We try to have the budget passed by Christmas, but because of the pandemic and different other pressures that we normally don't have at the staff level because of the pandemic, this allows a little bit of spreading out, more time to reflect on each different level, but it does give the chance for the budget to be passed early enough to get any tendering processes going early in the spring.
Thank you.
So
Any
at
questions?
council's, I guess, discretion.
Any questions or comments from council? Fred?
Yeah, if that's what Les is proposing, I'm prepared to go with it. I personally do like the way Mono in the past, compared to some other municipalities, gets their approved budget done by Christmas. But hey, if we can live with waiting off until February, I can go with it.
Thank you. Any further comments of council? Are we cool with, Ralph?
It's fine with me, Your Honor.
Sharon? Okay.
Yes, fine.
And yeah, and this is not without precedent. The county has slowed down its budget process. I was talking to Mayor Printo the other day from Los Angeles, and they're doing exactly the same thing for many of the same reasons, although they don't have a vacancy on their council to fill. So I think it's a prudent thing to do, and we'll have less work with Fred in terms of scheduling those meetings. Mindful that when we're talking about the budget, we should try and carve out space for budget discussion, as opposed to having a blended meeting where we have all kinds of other things as well. So I think we can all work together on this and come up with a good conclusion. Fred?
And Your Worship, I would reiterate my offer with Les that when we get a new counselor, I'm quite prepared to, spend a couple of hours going over the whole budget process in our last budget so that they understand where all the numbers can be found and how it all fits together. If the new counselor wants that, I'm prepared to give that time.
Thank you. We appreciate that, and I know that the new counselor will as well. There's nothing like.
Oh, sorry. I would
there's nothing.
offer that to all the council as well if they want to sit down ahead of any meetings once the budget comes out.
Yeah, thank you. There's nothing that replaces good mentoring. So next item on the agenda is an add-on, the ICIP Grant Transfer Payment Agreement, Island Lake Family Park. And I have a motion that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw authorizing the town of Mono to enter into a transfer payment agreement with the province of Ontario, substantially in the form as attached as Schedule A to the bylaw, to receive funds under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream, and that be signed by the mayor and clerk for the town of Mono, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Mankelo, seconded by Councillor Martin. Discussion, Kim, are you online? Can you give us some background on this particular agreement?
Sure. This is the agreement, or I'm sorry, this is the grant that we received for the $100,000 to go towards the Island Lake Family Park tennis courts. It's very much the same as the agreement that we received and council just passed a couple of weeks ago to receive the funds for the Mono community or the Mono Center tennis courts and infrastructure related to that project. So this is just basically, you know, what the government does, provincial and federal, in order for us to be able to submit our invoices as the project goes forward, and we would receive back upwards to the amount of $100,000 towards our tennis courts up at Island Lake Family Park.
Any questions of Kim? I just make a, Fred.
Kim, does it matter that I couldn't get through the whole agreement before I fell asleep? I just the appendices. Does that matter?
No, they're pretty standard.
Only 59 pages, Fred.
I didn't do it.
Apropos of that, I had an hour and a half long conversation with a local lawyer with regard to these agreements that we get into with the feds and the province. And they were finding all kinds of problems with the agreement. It was a different agreement, but nonetheless, it's similar to the extent that when we apply for a grant and we're awarded the grant, we're expected to enter into essentially a boilerplate agreement. We don't have a lot of choice in terms of unleashing the lawyers and making changes and stuff like that. You either sign their agreement or you don't get the grant. I mean, it's as simple as that. And there's no, ifs, ands, and buts about it. And I think I made my point, but certainly when the granting authority is writing the contract, however many pages it might be, they're in the catbird seat. And we've never had a problem in the past. Mindful of the fact that every other municipality that is participating in these programs is also entering into the exact same agreement. So I just wanted to put that on the record. And that's an hour and a half I do not get back, by the way.
You're saying, Your Honor, that Fred doesn't need to read these in the future.
Kim?
I just want to, chime in on that as well, is that when we received the transfer payment agreement for the Mono Community Center courts, and, I went through that page by page and then forwarded over to our town legal department. They said the exact same thing to me, is their boilerplate. There's not a whole lot that we could do even if we wanted to change it, so.
And forgive me for being a little bit glib about an hour and a half that I don't get back. It was actually a very rewarding discussion, I think, and shed a great deal of light on some of the processes that we have to go through. So, did we have a vote on that?
We had a motion.
Vote has not yet been cast, Your Worship. It has been moved
Okay.
and seconded.
Okay. Any opposed to the motion on the floor? Seeing none, it's passed. Sorry, I have a pile of paper here and I'm just out of sync. Anyways, we're on to Schedule A now, or pardon me, we're on to the items that have been identified by council for discussion from Schedule A, and we're still in the section Bylaws, Correspondence, New Business Additions to the Agenda. And the one item that has been identified, I believe, by Councillor Mangtalo is item number 6, which has to do with the COVID vaccine mandates. Ralph?
The reason I suggest that we bring this up is just to highlight that it's there and it's important, and it deals with a, I would say, a fairly major issue that is in many communities across Canada. And that is the question of community benefits versus personal rights. And there are different opinions about this, and I recognize that people who feel very strongly about their right to refuse a vaccine, etc., are doing so usually out of the deep moral sense that they have a right and wrong. And so it's important to me that we have this policy statement here from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which basically says that the community benefits usurp the personal benefits. That's a short form version, the Cold Note version. But I think it's an important one because what has happened now is we probably all expected we'd be over the pandemic by now. We didn't think we'd have a fourth wave. The fourth wave is primarily, not entirely, but primarily a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So that's important to recognize. So I think it's the reason I asked for this to be brought up to the agenda was that active agenda was that I think it's important that the OHRC has come out with this statement. Thank you.
Any comments on that item? I expected that the Human Rights Commission would err on the side of the protection of all as opposed to deference to the individual, as it were. And I know that sounds harsh, but the reality is that I think they've done the right thing. And I think that our medical officer of health has done the right thing with her letter of instruction with regarding to proof of vaccination. I know that's item number 5. And I'm breaking my own approach here to the consent agenda. But this is all very important stuff. I would just add to that I consider the enforcement of these things first and foremost to be directed by the province insofar as they have a police force. It's called the OPP. We can assist and do what we can, but they should be the primary enforcement for provincial regulations. And I hope that remains to be the case. And I'll leave it at that for the moment, but I think it's critical that they do not simply wash their hands of enforcement by expecting municipalities to do the work that they should be doing themselves. Any other thoughts? Okay, because we're embarking upon a different approach to Schedule A, one last opportunity to raise or bring forward anything from Schedule A that we may have overlooked earlier. Seeing none, we move to a motion to accept Schedule A to this agenda. We've already had a discussion about one, possibly two of the matters on that schedule. Do I have a mover for the motion to adopt? Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those opposed, anyone opposed to adoption of the Schedule A? Seeing none, matters carried. Reports of members of council or staff. Here I'm going to call on members of staff who feel that they have a matter that needs council attention. Hello, staff. I haven't scared you all off on making reports. Mark.
No, I was just going to advise, I'm continuing to have discussions with the Full Throttle group regarding the concerns that were raised through mediation. And other than that, Fred stole my thunder on the Joint Water Management Agreement meeting next week.
Thank you. Kim?
I just want to bring it to council's attention that we are experiencing some challenges with theft up at Lloyd Armstrong Park. In the past month, we've lost 2 picnic tables up there. We lost one. We had one up there. We did replace it. We put a second one up there, and it is now gone as well. So just wanted to bring that to your attention that there is someone enjoying some picnic tables, compliments of the town of Mono. So wanting you to know that, and just that meeting with the Island Lake Management Committee as far as the draft management plan, those meetings are going forward. We met last Thursday with Recreation Advisory Committee and with the planning and committees, and comments will be brought forth to council in that regard.
I was going to say, Kim, what's there to steal there? And then it dawned on me, picnic tables. Who would have thought? Good grief.
They were chained down with 1,300-pound chain and bolted into the cement.
Sharon? I'm speechless. Sharon, help.
Yeah, just about speechless. Yeah, that's really ridiculous. So what else can we do? I mean, paint them something obnoxious? I mean, did they take the chains too?
No, they're cutting the chains.
We could put tracking devices on them.
Yeah. Put a GPS tracer on them, embed them in the wood.
Yeah.
The question is whether or not to replace them, so I'm still thinking about that.
Do we have some that we could relocate temporarily, or are we robbing
Yes,
Peter?
No, I found one. Mike might not like this, but that was in the back of the Public Works garage area, so we're relocating it.
He seems to be taking that very stoically.
So far. I think I'm glad he's off site today.
Okay.
Last year we stole reserves. Now we steal his picnic table.
I know.
It was probably a COVID lunchroom, so we might have to replace it.
Right.
I want to do the inhumanity speech from the Hindenburg crash, but I won't. Mike, I see you're on, Mike. Do you have something for us?
Oh, I'm good, thanks, Your Worship.
Dave?
Thank you, Mayor Krillman. Just a few things, new applications coming in, Mono Hills Corporation for plan of condominium and site plan application. We're going to circulate for comments on that, including Dufferin County, of course. And also, we should be anticipating a pre-consultation for the Aragon Block 2. So where the hotel site is, but to the north of there. not the piece of budding on the north side of Mono Park Road, but further to the north, the larger piece. And then tomorrow we have committee of adjustment as our usual regular timing. 2 applications there, and there's more have come in. That's it.
Thanks. Anyone else on a staff report? Okay. Members of council, who wants to go first? Fred.
Yeah, I have one item. I don't think I told you this the last time because I think we cut our meeting short. This is with respect, and Les, I'm sort of talking to you here, the tentative Shelburne District Fire Board budget for 2022. I just want my fellow councilors to know that I went over it with a fine-tooth comb, and although there are some numbers in it that you won't like, I cannot find a way around it. The operating expenses are only going to increase by 2.7%. But because of probably some guesses on operating revenues, they're going to go way down. The bottom line is that the municipal levy is going to go up by 11.3%, which is kind of high. The precise increase to Mono, of course, will depend on any adjustments to the allocation formula. But the real news is the capital expenses. Last year, we froze them. We froze them because Shelburne had not signed the new agreement. They still haven't signed it. This year, they are proposing a 21.3% increase in our capital budget. And I've looked at the projections we have going forward to 2032, and I can't see a way around it. We have to replace some trucks, and we are now penciling in a figure in 2032 of $5 million for a new fire hall. Of course, that's really just a guess, but if we don't start planning for it now, it'll bite us in 2032. So the numbers are kind of high, Les, and I honestly, I went through it and I can't find a way to reduce them. That's all I have to report.
Les, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm not sure what to say to that until we
No,
put the budget all together.
I just wondered if you'd fallen off your chair.
Well, that was good. The reason the camera was off. Yes. No, I'm here. Like in past processes, we'll put it in the budget and, and deal with it at budget time.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Sharon, did you have anything to report today?
Nope.
Ralph?
Just one item of a personal nature, Your Honor and staff. Last Thursday, the town, out of kindness, planted a memorial tree to Betsy at the MG Monopollinator Garden, and there a lot of you came out for the ceremony as well as her family. And I just wanted to say that that was very much appreciated by myself and by the family. It was a very nice kindness, and I appreciate it. So I'm saying just a public thank you.
On behalf of council, it was an honor to be there. I have nothing to report. It's very quiet at the county right now, in as much as we have deferred committee meetings for the month, as well as committee chair meeting for the month. And when I have anything to report from the county, I'll let you know. And Fred, you've been over to the county and you've had some briefings.
And I can tell you, Your Worship, that there's something very odd going on, because when we thought of developing a vaccination policy for the town of Mono and the county, I am told I'm not an employee. But I had to go over to the county and sign some documents for Ontario tax purposes and federal tax purposes, and apparently I am an employee. which raises all kinds of interesting questions, but I will address them here.
It's always been confusing to me as to when you're an employee or you're not an employee, but I think the general rule is you're not an employee until you are.
If I could jump on that, Mr. Mayor, you're not an employee until you have to pay taxes, so that's why you have to fill out those.
Well, that
health
too.
forms.
Yeah, exactly. And
Well-
we always have to pay taxes. We don't avoid that.
Then we should be covered by the vaccination policy because I pay taxes.
Well, that's been my position, is that whatever policy they come up with should apply equally to us. And I think that with the exception of 2 members of County Council, there was strong concurrence with that. And besides, it's moot because we're both double vaccinated. Anyways, any other items with regard to council or staff projects reports? Seeing none, any notices of motion? Seeing none, we have no in-camera items. So I have a motion that we give, that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Mono, session 2021, held on September 28th, 2021, that it be signed by the mayor, sealed and clerk, and sealed in the and engrossed in the bylaw book. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Mantalo, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any objection to that motion? Seeing none, it is carried. So we have an adjournment motion. That we adjourn this meeting at 11:39. Everyone is waving.
You can go
Do I
back
have
and
a-
get your breakfast now, Ralph.
Indeed. Who's
Glenn?
going to move this motion?
Thanks, Fred.
Or will it die on the vine? Deputy Mayor Nix moves, seconded by Councillor Mantalo. All in favor, or pardon me, any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone.